All right, let's jump into something pretty wild today.
Oh, yeah. This one's a doozy.
It is. It really is. We are going deep on a conversation from the Joe Rogan experience with Elon Musk,
Of course.
naturally. And this one, I have to say,
Buckle up.
yeah, buckle up, because this one is all over the place.
It really is.
It's about government waste,
AI.
conspiracy theories.
A little bit of everything. It's a bit of a grab bag.
Yeah, so if you like a little bit of everything, this deep dive is for you.
It really is.
But there is sort of a through line here.
Yeah.
And what did you sort of see as the thread? I mean, I have my own take. Not at all. Speaking of which, let's start with his organization, Doge.
Yes. The Department of Government Efficiency.
Which sounds so innocuous.
Yeah.
Right. It sounds so like, oh, yeah, of course.
Bureaucratic and boring.
Yes, exactly. Not so much when Elon's involved.
No, not at all. I mean, he comes right out and says flat out, there's $1 trillion scam happening within the U.S. government.
$1 trillion.
$1 trillion with a T.
That's a huge number.
It's almost impossible to comprehend, really. It dwarfs any other scam in human history.
I know. It's like, how is that even possible? And, at first I was thinking, okay, is this hyperbole? But then he starts talking about what Doge is actually uncovering. And it's kind of mind-blowing.
Right. I mean, billions of dollars going to NGOs that have, no prior activity.
Right. Like, where does NGO come from?
Exactly. And millions of dead people still listed as alive in the Social Security database, potentially enabling all sorts of fraudulent payments.
Which is insane. It's like something out of a movie.
It really is.
And then there's this whole thing with the Treasury, where they're issuing payments with no categorization codes or descriptions, essentially like blank checks.
Yeah, basically untraceable money.
It's wild. So, okay, Doge is finding these problems, but what's the plan? How are they actually going to address this?
Well, and that's what I think is so interesting about Elon's approach. He's very focused on using technology to fix these problems.
Okay.
He sees a lot of this waste stemming from outdated systems, bureaucratic inefficiencies.
Okay.
Not necessarily outright corruption all the time.
Like incompetence more than anything.
Yeah, exactly. And so Doge is leveraging AI. They're using data analysis
Right.
to really pinpoint where the weaknesses are and then develop solutions that streamline processes and increase transparency.
So they're not just like yelling about it, they're actually trying to build the tools to fix it.
Exactly. It's a very proactive, solutions-oriented approach.
Which is so refreshing.
It really is. And I mean, whether they'll be successful, that remains to be seen. But the approach itself, I think, is really innovative.
I think so too. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out for sure. But he doesn't stop there. He also kind of gets into this whole deep state territory.
Yes, the infamous deep state.
And, starts talking about these powerful forces that are resisting Doge's efforts.
Which, the deep state is one of those concepts.
It can be a little bit of a rabbit hole.
Yeah, it can be a little bit of a rabbit hole. It's this idea that there's this sort of shadowy network of unelected officials who are really pulling the strings behind the scenes.
Right.
And it's often used to explain, why things don't change or why certain agendas seem to move forward regardless of who's in power.
Or who the people are voting for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's important, I think, to approach this concept with a bit of a critical eye because it's often very difficult to prove.
And it's also very easy to kind of fall into a conspiratorial mindset, right?
Absolutely. It's important to consider the evidence, but also the potential biases in how this concept is being presented.
Totally, totally. But Elon doesn't shy away from it, that's for sure.
No, he leans right in.
He really does. He even goes so far as to say that the mainstream media is complicit in all of this, acting as a kind of propaganda machine.
Yes. To discredit him and Doge.
And he specifically brings up this whole thing with the Epstein files as kind of evidence.
Right, which is a whole other can of worms.
Oh, yeah.
You've got these repeated promises to release the files and then delays and then redacted information.
Right. It's like, what's actually in there?
Yeah, and Elon seems to think that there are powerful people who are actively working to suppress the information in those files.
Which is a scary thought if you really think about it.
It is, and potentially because they themselves were involved with Epstein.
Right, right.
So it all ties into this larger idea of corruption and abuse of power that he's so concerned about.
And, it's important to note, these are allegations.
Absolutely. We should be cautious about jumping to conclusions.
Right. But it does kind of make you think, what's really going on here?
Absolutely. It raises some really important questions about transparency and accountability, especially when it comes to this kind of sensitive information.
Totally, totally. And it makes you wonder, if this is just the tip of the iceberg, what else is out there?
Exactly. And that's what makes this conversation so fascinating.
It really does. Now, shifting gears a little bit, because we could talk about this all day, but Elon also spends a good chunk of this interview talking about artificial intelligence.
Right, which he's obviously very passionate about.
Well, his perspective has evolved quite a bit over time, right?
It really has. He used to be mostly worried about the existential risks of AI.
Like the robots are going to take over.
Yeah, like the idea that super intelligent AI could basically wipe out humanity.
Which, I can see why that would be a concern.
It's a valid concern. But now he seems much more focused on developing what he calls truth-seeking AI with his company Grok.
Okay, so what is truth-seeking AI? What does that even mean?
It's a great question. Essentially, he wants to create an AI that can sift through vast amounts of information,
Okay.
identify patterns, and then present unbiased insights. He's really critical of what he sees as ideological biases
Yeah.
in existing AI systems, especially those developed by companies like OpenAI.
Which he co-founded, which is kind of interesting.
Right. It's almost like he's trying to course correct.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, I helped create this, but now it's going in the wrong direction.
Exactly. And he uses this kind of extreme example to illustrate his point.
The misgendering versus nuclear war thing.
Yes. Which
Yeah.
is like, whoa, that's a pretty stark contrast.
It is.
But it really highlights this crucial question in AI ethics. How do we make sure that AI aligns with human values?
Right.
And doesn't end up amplifying our own biases in really harmful ways?
Which is a huge question.
It's a huge question, and something that researchers and developers are grappling with, as AI becomes more and more integrated into our lives.
Yeah, it's not going away.
No, it's definitely here to stay.
Yeah, it's something we have to figure out for sure. Now, before we kind of dive deeper into Elon's views on AI and his work with Grok,
Yes.
I think it's worth taking a moment to kind of look at the personal side of this story, because Elon reveals that he's facing some pretty intense scrutiny, even threats, because of his outspoken nature.
It is a bit wild, isn't it?
And his work with Doge, yeah.
It really highlights the fact that, challenging the status quo can often come with personal risks.
Yeah.
And he's not just talking about, online trolls. He's talking about death threats.
Right.
Threats to desecrate his corpse.
Wow.
Even people traveling to Austin with the intent to harm him.
That's really scary.
It's frightening.
It really is. It's like, wow, this is serious stuff.
And it makes you wonder, how much of this is genuine anger
Right.
versus how much is being fueled by misinformation, media narratives,
Yeah, because there's a lot of stuff out there about Elon, some of it true, some of it not.
Exactly. And it's hard to know what to believe sometimes.
Right. But it's clear that he feels targeted, that's for sure.
He does. And this feeling of being under attack, I think, really shapes his perspective on the world.
And his mission with Doge.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we're going to delve more into Elon's experiences and his views on the media in the next part of our deep dive.
Can't wait.
So stick around. Things are about to get even more interesting.
They always do. So, yeah, I think it's safe to say Elon is not a fan of the mainstream media.
He's not holding back at all.
Not even a little bit.
And it really ties into, I think, what we were talking about at the end of the last part, which is this sense that he's being targeted,
Totally.
and that the media is playing a role in that.
Right. He specifically calls out what he calls legacy media,
Okay.
accusing them of bias and pushing a very specific agenda.
And what is that agenda in his view?
Well, he sees them as being very closely aligned with the Democratic Party.
Okay.
And he even uses the term associated propaganda at one point.
Well.
When he's talking about the Associated Press, which I thought was pretty striking,
Yeah.
it really shows how much distrust he has for these traditional media outlets.
Wow. And this distrust, I think, also kind of explains his support for Trump.
It definitely seems to be a factor.
He mentions viewing the 2020 election as kind of a pivotal moment.
Or turning point.
Yeah, like if the Democrats had won again, he really felt like things would have shifted irrevocably.
I see.
And a big part of that seems to be his concerns about illegal immigration.
Right. He argues that the Democratic Party is essentially incentivizing illegal immigration
Okay.
to try to gain a voting advantage.
Interesting. And he points to specific policies like free health care for illegal immigrants in California as an example.
Yeah, he sees that as a magnet for illegal immigration.
Okay.
And he also expresses concern about states like California and New York getting rid of ID requirements for voting.
Which is a pretty controversial issue.
It is.
And he believes that could facilitate voter fraud.
Right. And, it's important to remember that these are very complicated issues
Absolutely.
with valid arguments on both sides.
Yes, we are just presenting what Elon said in this conversation,
Exactly.
not endorsing any particular political stance.
Not at all.
Okay, just want to make that clear.
For sure, for sure.
But what did you make of his claim that the media is deliberately perpetuating false narratives about him and Doge?
Well, he specifically mentions that whole Nazi salute controversy
Oh, right.
and the claim that Doge is cutting essential services for pregnant mothers.
Wow.
And he sees these as deliberate attempts to discredit him
Okay.
and undermine Doge's work.
So he's basically saying this is a smear campaign.
Yeah, essentially.
Wow, that's pretty heavy stuff. And it all kind of circles back to those threats against him.
Right. I mean, he seems to genuinely believe that these investigations into government corruption have made him a target.
I mean, you can definitely hear the fear in his voice.
Oh, yeah. There's a real sense of urgency there. Like, he knows he's playing with fire.
It's kind of chilling when he compares himself to someone poking a hornet's nest.
He's right, waking up what he calls the vampires.
Ooh, that's a great visual.
Isn't it? It really gives you a sense of the forces he believes he's up against.
And he even admits that he has to tread carefully.
Yeah.
Because pushing too hard on this corruption issue could actually put his life in danger.
Which is a pretty sobering thought.
It is. It really makes you think about the potential consequences of speaking truth to power.
Absolutely. Because sometimes the truth can be a dangerous thing.
It really can. So it seems like Elon's caught in this really tricky situation
He is.
where he's trying to expose these potential wrongdoing,
Right.
but he's also aware that doing so could put him in real danger.
It's a delicate balance, for sure.
But amidst all of this darkness,
Yeah.
there's also this glimmer of hope and idealism that comes through when he talks about his vision for humanity's future.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can't talk to Elon Musk without talking about SpaceX
Right, right.
and his dream of making humanity a multiplanetary species.
Which is a huge goal.
It's a massive undertaking.
And he really believes it's essential for our long-term survival.
It does.
And he gets really into the weeds about the challenges they're facing in developing reusable spacecraft.
Oh, yeah, he talks about the heat shield
Right.
and how it has to withstand these insane temperatures during re-entry.
And you can hear the passion in his voice when he talks about these engineering feats.
Oh, absolutely. It's like this is what really gets him excited,
Yeah, it's like these projects provide a kind of counterbalance to all the negativity he's experiencing in other areas.
Right, like a sense of purpose and hope.
But even when he's discussing something seemingly positive like AI, he still expresses this concern about the potential for harm.
That's true. He brings up those dangers of programming AI with biased goals.
Right.
And he reiterates that example of an AI potentially prioritizing misgendering over a nuclear threat.
Which is just crazy to think about.
It is, but it shows how seriously he takes these ethical considerations.
Yeah, it seems like he's wary of any system, whether it's AI or government that operates without transparency and accountability.
Right. He wants to see things done in the open.
And this leads back to his own venture, Grok.
Yes, his truth-seeking AI.
Where he's trying to create an AI that's more aligned with his own values of openness and objectivity.
And he contrasts that with OpenAI, which he co-founded but now criticizes for becoming closed source and profit-driven.
It's like he's saying, hey, I helped start this thing, but it's gone astray.
Exactly. He's trying to create something different, something better.
But that raises some interesting questions, doesn't it?
Of course.
Like, how do you ensure that an AI is truly objective?
Right.
And not simply reflecting the biases of its creators?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just AI,
Right.
Any system designed by humans is going to carry some of our inherent biases.
It's unavoidable.
It is. The key is to acknowledge those biases and strive for as much transparency and accountability as possible.
Which is easier said than done.
It is, but it's a worthy goal.
It is, for sure. And it seems like Elon's trying to do that through his work with Doge SpaceX and even his acquisition of Twitter, which is now X.
Right. He's definitely not afraid to shake things up and challenge the status quo.
Even if it makes him a target.
Exactly. And that takes us back to where we started.
Those circle.
Right back to that idea of government waste.
Which Elon doesn't just believe is a problem.
No, he argues it might be the biggest scam in human history.
Trillions of dollars, potentially.
It's a staggering number.
And he uses this really powerful analogy comparing the government to a poorly run business with an unlimited credit line.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Really highlighting the lack of accountability and the sheer scale of the problem.
And he brings up some pretty stunning examples to illustrate his point.
Like the Department of Defense failing to pass an audit for years.
Right. Billions of dollars unaccounted for.
It's mind-boggling to think about.
It is.
And then there's the Social Security database with millions of deceased individuals still listed as alive.
Yeah, potentially opening the door to all sorts of fraud.
These examples really paint a pretty stark picture of systemic inefficiencies
They do.
and raise concerns about the potential vulnerabilities within these really crucial government institutions.
Absolutely. And, Elon doesn't attribute this solely to incompetence.
No.
He sees it as a deliberate system designed to benefit those in power.
A system that he believes the deep state actively protects.
And he even implicates the mainstream media, claiming that they act as a propaganda machine
Wow.
to discredit anyone who challenges this system, including him and Doge.
That's a pretty bold accusation.
It is. He's essentially suggesting that there's this whole network of powerful individuals and institutions who benefit from this corrupt system
Right.
and are willing to silence anyone who tries to expose it.
It's kind of like a conspiracy theory in itself.
It is, and it ties back into his concerns about the Epstein files
Right.
and the lack of transparency surrounding their release.
He sees it as evidence of this larger cover-up.
A system that's rigged to protect the powerful.
And he even brings up the attempted assassination of Trump.
And the curious case of the shooter with a seemingly non-existent online presence.
It's like something out of a movie.
It really is.
And it all feeds into this narrative of a larger conspiracy, a system that operates in the shadows.
It's a chilling thought, and it raises a really big question. How much is really going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of?
Right. And if those in power are willing to go to such lengths to protect their interests,
Yeah.
what hope is there for those trying to bring about real change?
That's a very daunting question.
It is. It really is. But I think one of the key takeaways from this conversation is that we can't afford to be passive observers.
We can't just sit back and let things happen.
We need to be critical thinkers.
Yeah.
We need to question the narratives that we're given, and we need to seek out information from a variety of sources.
Absolutely. We need to be informed and engaged.
Exactly. And we need to be willing to have difficult conversations.
Yes, even about controversial topics.
Because that's how we start to break down these systems of power and hold those in charge accountable.
It's not always comfortable, but it's necessary.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about for sure.
It really is.
But even with all the controversies and complexities, we've been discussing,
Yeah.
I keep coming back to this one question. Like, can Elon actually make a difference?
That's the big question.
Can he really reform a system that seems so deeply entrenched
Right.
and so resistant to change?
That is the million-dollar question,
Yeah.
and there's no easy answer.
Right.
I mean, on the one hand, you have his work with Doge,
Yeah.
which has undeniably brought a level of transparency to government operations that we've never seen before.
Like he's shining a light on these inefficiencies,
Right.
these potential vulnerabilities, forcing people to pay attention.
You can't ignore it anymore.
But then you have his own experiences with the backlash,
Mm.
the threats,
Yeah.
this feeling of being targeted for simply trying to expose the truth.
It's like you said, he's poking the hornet's nest.
Right.
And who knows what's going to happen when those hornets come swarming out.
It makes you wonder, is shining a light on these things actually making things worse?
It's a real possibility.
Yeah, is it better to just kind of leave it be, or
Is ignorance bliss in this case?
or are we better off knowing, even if it means things get a little messy?
I don't know. It's a tough question.
It is a tough question, and it makes you think, is there a point where the personal risk
Yeah.
outweighs the potential for good?
That's something Elon has to grapple with, for sure.
Because he's putting himself out there, he's making himself a target.
And it's not just him, it's the people around him, too.
It's his family, his employees.
Yeah, anyone associated with him.
It's a lot to carry.
It is, but, despite all that, he seems determined to keep pushing forward.
He's not backing down.
Not at all. And it's interesting how he's approaching this challenge from multiple angles.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, you've got SpaceX, which
Yeah.
represents this really optimistic vision of humanity's future as a multi-planetary species.
Like a backup plan in case things go south here?
Exactly. And then you have Doge with its focus on using technology
Right.
to bring efficiency and transparency to government.
More practical, more immediate.
Right. And then there's X, which he seems to view as a platform for open dialogue, challenging those established narratives.
It's like a three-pronged approach.
Yeah, something for the future,
Yeah.
something for the present, and something for the way we communicate and share ideas.
I like it. It's a holistic approach.
It is. And, it'll be interesting to see if it actually works.
Yeah. Will any of it be enough?
Will these efforts actually lead to lasting positive change?
Or will it just provoke a backlash that makes things even worse?
I mean, that's the big unknown, right?
It is. I wish we had a crystal ball.
I know, me too,
Mhm.
but that's what makes this whole conversation so fascinating.
Yeah.
It highlights the complexities of trying to change these deeply entrenched systems.
Like, it's not just about having the right ideas or even the right technology.
Right. It's about power dynamics. It's about navigating these really intricate webs of relationships and incentives.
And it's about understanding the potential consequences of your actions.
Because sometimes, even with the best of intentions, you can end up making things worse.
It's a delicate balance for sure.
And even with all the uncertainty, I think there's something really inspiring about Elon's determination.
I agree. It's like he's saying, I see these problems and I'm going to do something about them.
And whether he ultimately succeeds or not, I think that attitude is something we can all learn from.
Yeah, it's about not being afraid to challenge the status quo
To speak truth to power even when it's risky.
and to keep pushing forward even when things get tough.
Exactly. Because the future is worth fighting for.
Well said, well said. This has been another amazing deep dive.
It has.
We've covered so much ground.
We have.
Government wastes the deep state. AI, Elon Musk's personal experiences.
It's been a whirlwind.
It has. It really has, but it's been so thought-provoking.
And I hope it's encouraged our listeners to think critically about the world around them.
To question the narratives they're given and to stay engaged in these important conversations.
Because ultimately, the future is up to all of us.
It is. It really is. And on that note, this has been The Deep Dive.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time for another fascinating journey into the depths of knowledge and ideas.